Hello, welcome to Talking Pedagogy with Pat and Rafa, where we talk about Reggio-inspired practice and other related pedagogies, sometimes with us, sometimes with a guest, sometimes with you. We are colleagues and friends who have been co-constructing our understanding of the Reggio Emilia approach for a while, supporting ourselves and others, and deepening our thinking and practice. Today, it will be us, Pat and Rafa, and the topic is Demystifying the Reggio Emilia approach and what is our relationship to it. So with that, Pat, yay! Since it's our first episode, would you mind talking a little bit about how we came to have come to this work together, and anything else you think would be interesting for our listeners to know for our very first podcast episode?
Absolutely. Um, Rafa, it has been such a journey with you over the past, I'm going to say, 4+ years in having conversations about Reggio, in teaching a class around Reggio Emilia that we're still teaching, and also coaching with you and doing professional development with you in a number of different contexts. And I think the reason that we kind of come together and mesh so well is that we both are creative people and we believe that teaching is an art. And
Mm,
Reggio Emilia really holds all of those things that I think both you and I hold so dear about teaching and pedagogy, all in one place and in one approach. So once we started, there was seemingly no stopping. And the reason that we wanted a more defined way of continuing conversations is because when we finish our class, we always feel like, gosh, there was so many more topics, so many more things to say, and never enough time. So I'm excited that we'll be talking about Reggio Emilia here together. I'm also excited that we're going to be bringing in other experts and
mm.
inviting others to speak with us about not only Reggio Emilia, but other pedagogies as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. I really appreciate how you called me a creative person. I didn't always see myself like that. And over time, working with you and working in this way, I've seen myself more and more as a creative person. I've broadened my sense of what it means to be a creative, connecting ideas and thoughts that don't seem related at first together. I think as a form of creativity, which is something I enjoy.
Absolutely.
So I think it's really exciting because you have a background in the theater arts, no, as well.
Yeah, that's how I came to teaching, was from having quite a long career. Actually, in my 40s is when late 40s, I went back to school to get my master's for early childhood because I had always been drawn to it, because it is so creative. So when I was daylighting, I'm not going to say moonlighting because in the arts, we are always working at night usually. But I would find myself gravitating towards spaces with children and working in different contexts with children, whether it was performing or creating content. Um, I've created some different classes that were very creative, tutus and tea. Um, Things like that. I was just always writing books, for that class. And so just kept finding myself in that early childhood space and always feeling so happy, content, and so much joy because there's such a time of wonder
Mm,
in the beginning. And I love stepping into the space of when the imagination is just starting to wake up and really empowering young children, which I think the Reggio Emilia approach does such a beautiful and eloquent job of doing, the framework that teachers work in, of inspiring young children
mm.
to use their imaginations and to believe in the power of imagination. So that's how I found my way to it.
Mm. Yeah, and I found my way to it starting first. I started teaching through Teach for America, and the pedagogy or philosophy of learning, I guess is another way to say pedagogy. It was very focused on, I would say there's one right answer.
Mhm.
There's, it was focused more on control, right? And at first I was like, yeah, makes sense. This is really clear. And then over time, I started reading just more and more different approaches and perspectives, including Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy, like Pedagogy of the Oppressed and Bell Hooks and Teaching to Transgress. And it really had me question about what did it mean to educate? And so over time, I started figuring out more what I didn't like or didn't want or didn't believe in, if you will. And it wasn't until I got my master's at Stanford and education that I started really defining what I really wanted. And by then, I still really didn't know a lot about the Reggio Emilia approach, but I did observe being nursery school, which is, I don't know if they would identify as Reggio inspired, but they're very into loose parts play. They're very arts based. I would call it a very strongly Reggio inspired program, just on the surface at least. And then going to work in the Bronx in a independent charter school called Hecate Community Charter School that was really trying to do Reggio inspired practice within the context of a independent charter, which is very interesting. Unfortunately,
Mm,
that school was closed by our authorizer, which was very upsetting for the community, and is what actually then led to me getting a job as now the director of a preschool, Mi Casita Preschool in Brooklyn, which is where we met in
right.
2020 in the midst of the pandemic, and
Right.
where I really started to formalize a lot of the experience and integrate a lot of the experiences and what I believed with you and with others, and realize that the Reggio Emilia approach really was a strong framework within which to further grow as an educator.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited. I mean, we've been talking now about the Reggio Emilia approach for a couple of minutes. Maybe we talk a little bit about what it is, how each of us would define it. I
Right.
could start with a quote from Loris Malaguzzi, considered by many to be, the founder, the grandfather, I guess we would say, of the approach. Um, and in the article, "The Image of the Child Where Teaching Begins," he says this about the community. All of this is a great forest. Inside the forest is the child. The forest is beautiful, fascinating, green, and full of hopes. There are no paths. Although it isn't easy, we have to make our own paths as teachers and children and families in the forest. Sometimes we find ourselves together within the forest. Sometimes we may get lost from each other. Sometimes we'll greet each other from far away across the forest. But it's living together in this forest that is important. And this living together is not easy. It's not easy.
It isn't easy. And on another note, I think when reading this quote, what it was making me think of is in part what it is that we have found a forest that has a lot of educators walking around right now, needing a space to reflect and grow together.
Mhm,
That was really clear during the pandemic. And I know we want to focus on how we define Reggio, but I also want to just spend a moment sharing that, we all as educators are part of a forest. And right now, some of us could feel like deforesting is going on.
mhm,
Um, the pandemic was a time that really caused us to take a lot of great hits to our educational system. It exposed a lot. It made us stop and think about technology, about parent engagement, which is a huge part of the Reggio Emilia approach. Um, but it also left educators feeling very isolated. And I
mm,
think that what you and I have both been feeling, which is another thing that truly has sparked this, us wanting to do this, is that educators are so in need of just having a safe place to come and reflect and talk and think together about trials and tribulations that we're facing right now as educators. So that is a forest that I think I'm excited to be tending with all of you as we plant new ideas and new ways to think about pedagogy and early childhood education. And I
mm,
don't think, when speaking about Reggio, that there's one pure way of doing Reggio. And I think, Rafa,
absolutely.
that may be what you were getting at when you said, let's talk a little bit about demystifying the Reggio Emilia approach.
Mhm,
So I'll share a little bit and then I want to hear what you think. But I think from having been to Reggio Emilia in Italy, I was privileged enough to go from the school that I was working at. They sent me, and I would say I was so inspired, and I realized too that so much of what they were doing was grounded and rooted in their Italian culture, their history, and that, as Raf and I always say, we're not ever, when we're working with teachers, expecting that we're trying to duplicate what they do in Italy. That's why in America we say inspired, Reggio influenced. Now some are saying cycle of inquiry. claiming it more as it's Reggio, but it's a different way of framing it. So I would say that the reason I'm saying any of these things is that there's not one way to approach Reggio Emilia, but there are certain tenets that frame the work. And I'm
Mhm.
going to toss the ball to you now, Rafa, just to get you to share a little bit about some of those tenets and the ones that you and I think, always find ourselves
Mm.
really holding.
Yeah, I think if someone asked me what is the Reggio Emilia approach, I would begin my answer with, well, it starts with having a strong image of children and adults and humans, and thinking about if children were capable of of doing beautiful things, if adults are capable of doing beautiful things, how would you design a classroom? How would you design a school? How would you design a system grounded in, and in this case, in the history of Reggio Emilia, right? So very briefly, in the wake of World War II, people in the village of Villacella, I think, wanted to build a school and wanted a better future, a more democratic future that really believed in the potential of young children. And up until then, there hadn't really been a lot of serious thought given to the education of very young children. So and then thinking of having a strong image again of children and of adults, they started thinking of with Loris Malaguzzi and others about theories that complemented that value or that tenet of a strong image of children, right? So they really pulled on the ideas of Leo Vygotsky, and they really pulled the ideas of Piaget and John Dewey, and so when I think about what it means, the Reggio Emilia approach means for me or for others nowadays, it's knowing about the history in that way, learning from the theorists, right, that they were pulling from, and also starting to think about who inspires you. So, for example, I would say for myself, I'm really into Alison Gopnik's work. I would include Bell Hook's work there. So the ultimate idea of the Reggio Emilia approach is to develop your own pedagogy or philosophy of learning, building on the work, right, and centering the humanity of everybody. So that might sound a little bit still up in the clouds, but I think it's really important to start there because when we start thinking about practice, which is the implications of these values and theories, and the reflection that's required to make that a reality, if we lose sight of the why and where the regimen, the approach comes from, it's very easy then to lose sight of alignment of practice with our values. And so before I go too much more into it with some examples, Pat, what do you think about that? Or what would you elaborate on or add?
I get caught up because I think this is a time where we're experiencing a lot of difficulty in our school systems of providing true equity.
Mm,
And so you caught me. I started thinking about this approach and equity, and I was catapulted back to your initial story of how your school that you were working in stopped. It was a public school, and they took that opportunity of the Reggio Emilia approach away.
hmm
And I think that it is a challenging pedagogical approach because it requires um, a certain framework from the leadership to be in place in order for it to flourish and grow and take hold. And such as having meeting time, such as adults being respected for their own passions and interests and continued education. You said it was the first time that when Reggio began, it was kind of the first time that there was even an approach to early childhood. Children were just being cared for. They were being nurtured, but they were not being taught or looked at as fellow students and collaborators. And I think, Rafa, that's what I always love about approach. And this is why when you start with the strong image of the child, it is imperative that anybody working in this approach sees young children as very capable, as coming in with their own OWNED resources, their own thinking, their own beginning cultural experiences. And all of that feeds uh, the approach to this approach. Like that's those concentric Grafenbrenner, those circles are all connected, that the child is living in, their community, their school, their um, just the culture. All of it is, kind of working together. And so you can't again, going back to strong image of the child, you can't really do this work if you don't see children as being able to be equal collaborators.
Hmm.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, I mean, as we're talking, I'm thinking of also ways we can start talking about the implications or some like practical things for a moment,
mhm.
right? So, one of the implications of us having a strong image of children is that you're more likely then to schedule your day to allow extensive time for young children to play, because there's a lot of research around the value of play and in many domains, and really being aware of when we're interrupting play, perhaps to try to extend something and when we're observing and then reflecting. So in this approach, we're always thinking like that. Like you said this, Pat, before. Like it's a thinking person's pedagogy. It's a way of approaching childhood in practice that acknowledges that there's not one right way, but there are definitely more intentional ways to do things, right? So at Mi Casita preschool, where I direct, we're always thinking about, okay, what is the setup of the environment so that children can be autonomous? How are the paints organized? How are the brushes organized? How are the loose parts organized? Where are the recycled materials? Right? We don't tend to use a lot of commercial toys because we believe children are very capable of using their imaginations to make things on their own with recycled materials and loose parts, for example. So that is one of the reasons that we really limit the use of commercial toys, which is different than saying that you can never use commercial toys, right? That's the whole thinking.
Mhm.
Sometimes a child might be really into a concept and or really wants to learn how to make their own airplane, and you do have a toy that's actually an airplane that could serve as a model that they can then draw from to then create their own, right? So again, getting at the point that the key is reflection. I think that's what differentiates this approach a lot from
Yeah.
others. There's reflection as a wayfinder through that forest to maintain a sense of coherence, because while we don't know always where we're going, we are always making a way. And that way does have a certain level of structure and organization.
Right. And I think in our class, we always talk about, and you started to kind of touch on it, going back to equity, is that all children have the right to wonder,
Hmm.
and to be respected and to dream and to um, have the ability to be leaders in their own education. So, I think that is what I'm hopeful that we all can step into, however much of the tenets you're able to actually bring in and support. Some of these tenets can find their way into anybody's pedagogy and can create more equity. And all children deserve that, right? And so I think that's what I'm hopeful about. And I know we talk a lot about it. Is a lot of times Reggio is in this country reserved
Hmm.
for more privileged settings, um, and that's unfortunate. So, how do we, in whatever place you're finding yourself, um, we're going to continue to talk about some of these tenets and how you can carve out time, no matter what you're being asked to do. That there will be places for this to really hold up the joy, the wonder, and play. And also, this is not only just about a loose, like Rafa was saying, a loose kind of approach. It is very intentional and very organized and very planned. And we'll be sharing in the future with you um, different ways that we've seen this approach just blow our minds, different projects and studies that we've seen happen and how they came about. We'll be having experts come on and talk about that, which I'm excited to be sharing with you. Um, and so, yes, it is, to demystify it does take a little time. And so, just in this one conversation, I think we're kind of dancing around some of the things that come up as most important to us, but there's a lot more.
Yeah, I think for today, the demystifying, one of the big takeaways I hope anyone takes from this is that it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's
No.
a thoughtful approach that requires dialoguing, talking, being like, what do you think? Maybe we'll try this. And to your point, Pat, and it's not loose. It's actually requires a lot of rigor in aligning practice with what you think. So it's not uncommon in a Reggio inspired setting that teachers and parents and children are asking each other, well, why is this set up like this? Why is it like that? Why, what could it be? What are we going for? Um, and it doesn't mean everything we know from perhaps more traditional approaches go out the window. In fact, the opposite, that can be really helpful. For example, my background in teaching reading in kindergarten and first grade is really helpful when I'm working with children now when I think about early literacy skills in a Reggio inspired context. But that's not what I'm emphasizing or leading with. I'm first seeing what is interesting to the children, what they're thinking, and then
Mm,
finding the points and the moments throughout the year, the thousands of moments throughout the year where perhaps certain interventions, I'll call them, or approaches can be helpful in supporting children extend their literacy and their play at the same time. So it's just to say that this is not an approach that says, "But you can't do this." It's more so than not. It's about saying yes and going with it.
yeah. And understanding early childhood development so that, like Rafa was just saying, it leads, what you're looking for to make sure that children are getting all those domains of learning. Um, but it's just a different way of doing it.
Hmm.
So I think that's where the demystifying kind of comes in, is like, but how are we assessing? And teachers today are driven, to really think about assessments all the time. And so there are ways to be mindful of assessments and to do assessments while still letting this be the way you teach. They're not separate.
No,
You
there.
just have to build a different bridge to the assessments, right, Rafa?
Mhm. Exactly. And in Reggio, well, this will be a topic for a different episode, but documentation is assessment, communication, planning all at the same time, which
Yep.
can be really difficult to wrap one's head around until you experience it. But it's
Yes.
quite elegant and beautiful in that way.
And beauty. I'm glad you brought up that word because beauty is at the heart of how this, I think, progresses in a school. Beauty is where it starts, and beauty in so many respects, but also aesthetic beauty. You
Mhm.
know, um, that really plays prominently because we see the environment as the third teacher. And
Mhm.
the environment should be very organized and should be very inviting and should be very um, clearly read by the children so that they can have autonomy in the environment.
Yeah.
Um, so, all of those are really important, other things that we'll be unpacking in future conversations.
So yeah, and definitely going into the very practical of like what is the thinking routine that can help me get from point A to point B, right? And what are examples or practices that might be useful? So we're really excited to talk about that. I still teach in the classroom while being a director of a school, and I'm currently teaching in a public school setting for the summer with Stanford and in a school district, a local school district, and doing this approach in a public school setting with the limitations of space and furniture uh, at the moment. So I'm always thinking about, how do we make this approach work in many different contexts?
Yes, very important. And I think at this point, what I'm thinking, Rafa, is it'd be nice to talk a little bit more about what people can expect when they do visit with us, some of the building blocks of what will be always a part of what we do.
Hmm.
Do you want to share that?
Sure. Well, we'll always be starting with a question of that focuses the whole episode and talking through it with between ourselves or with guests, including you potentially listening, and then really focus on just practical examples and or stories that really illustrate our answers to these questions around pedagogy and turning theory into practice and turning these different approaches to learning that are ultimately liberating, I think, into reality. And then, Pat, I know that for the podcast, a big part of it is about just cultivating community. So, can you speak
Yes.
a little more to that?
Well, I do think that that is a driving reason that we're doing it. Is really that was our call to action. Is to find a and create a space for all people in early childhood who might be interested in having conversation. So we're going to be, as Rafa said, bringing on experts, and we're going to be asking you. And sorry for the beeping. I don't know if everybody can hear
It's my, they probably can. Sorry, trying to put myself on do not disturb,
that.
but it's still going through. Uh,
That's okay, but we're going to be continuing to build our own technical savvy as we continue to invite you into this space. But also, it is a comfortable space. It is a space where you will be asked to join. You will be asked to send in questions that can help drive some of the content that we'll be creating for you. And it's just, gosh, just a fun, joyous place to continue to create more wonder about how we can all continue to improve our own pedagogy.
mhm.
So I'm really excited and I can't wait to meet some of you. And we'll make opportunities for that to happen as well. We'll create opportunities for that.
So we invite you to stay in contact, and in the show notes, you will see a link to a Google form, and you'll be able to submit questions, feedback, and thoughts for future episodes, as well as sharing if you'd be interested in being on the podcast. We're looking forward to hearing from all of you. So with that, Pat, I think that concludes our first episode.
Well, I can only say I'm looking forward to more. And I can't, again, wait to see how many of you are going to take us up on the offer to really engage and become a part of this community. It's very exciting, and we are very dedicated to providing this space for you. So please take us up on it.
Excited to connect. Till next
Connecting the dots in early childhood education. Thank you, Rafa.
time.
While Rafa works for Mikasita or with Mikasita, I'm also working with Connecting the Dots in Early Childhood Education. And we'll be sharing more about both of the places that we're engaged in working and sharing what we're learning. So looking forward to more of that as well.
And in the forum, you will also see, if you were interested in learning more about connecting the dots, there will be a link there as
Thanks.
well, and you can inquire.
Thanks.
Okay,
And with
well,
that,
sorry
ding,
with that
ding, time to
ding,
go.
ding. Time to go. Okay, bye.
See you later.